She walked in ready to marry. She walked out alone. But it wasn't the fight. It's what she found out after. The wedding wasn't delayed. It wasn't rescheduled. It was ripped off the calendar in the wildest, most public way possible, right before it was supposed to be filmed. No final dress fitting, no makeup crew, no, "You may now kiss the bride." Just pure silence, broken only by Meline storming out of their shared apartment with the mic still clipped to her dress and producers caught in the crossfire. The intimate, fairy tale ending everyone expected from Meline and Luke? It vanished in one explosive morning, and the raw, off-camera tension leading up to it is something TLC barely touched. And if you think it came out of nowhere, it didn't. Sarah here from Sister Wives Daily. Welcome to the story TLC didn't finish. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single blink. We're going full throttle into the emotional wreckage, the quiet red flags, and that painful final moment that made a wedding turn into a one-way walkout. And this time, I want to hear from you in the comments. Was this about Meline's jealousy, Luke's emotional vanishing act? Or do you think one of them knew it was over and played along anyway? On the surface, it looked like the perfect crash, months of on and off arguing, awkward silences at dinner, mismatched energy in interviews. But the truth is, this ending wasn't loud. It was sneaky. Still, you could feel it, in Luke's body posture whenever Meline opened up, in Meline's fake laugh during the family dinner episode, the one where Luke's dad said she was too much for him. That laugh wasn't love, that laugh was survival mode. Everything looked okay on Instagram just a few days before. There were stories of wedding prep, salon booking screenshots, venue hints in background shots. That content didn't accidentally pop up. It was curated. Meline knew eyes were on her, but real eyes notice small things. And hers? They weren't excited. They were swollen. And Luke, well, cold wasn't the word people used for him. It was calculating. Fans started rewinding old clips. One caught him checking his phone during her emotional confession. Another noticed how he flinched slightly when she touched his shoulder. Discomfort on camera means something when emotional stakes are that high. Sympathy wore off quickly when fans lined up his patterns. Conversations turning into interrogations. Affection only showing up after confrontation. That's not love. That's damage control. But here's where it flips. Meline wasn't always the victim in fans' eyes, not by a long shot. Some episodes painted her as emotionally erratic, especially around questions of loyalty. She'd jump from calm to chaos halfway through a sentence, especially when Luke took too long to answer. But then again, when someone you're about to marry still can't confirm who's picking him as their emergency contact, maybe panic isn't the problem. Maybe intuition is. The final straw wasn't even filmed. That's what makes this so explosive. What we have instead are the pieces, what she was holding when she left, what production sources mentioned anonymously, and the fact that Luke never looked shocked. Gutted? No. Guilty? Possibly, but definitely not confused. Meline left holding a folded piece of paper in her hand. One fan-enhanced clip shows a printed screenshot. Credible rumors say it was a DM's printout, allegedly a message thread between Luke and someone whose name has not been released, but whose picture has quickly disappeared from a suspiciously wiped Instagram account linked to Luke's friend group. None of this is confirmed by TLC, but the timelines match. And the timing? Brutal. One night before the scheduled wedding day. But what Meline did right before the cameras rolled, that moment changed everything. Instead of calling Luke in to talk, she called a rideshare. Alone. Called it, waited inside the building lobby, and didn't come back out until she saw headlights. Crew members reportedly tried to stop her. One even asked if she would film just a goodbye clip. She said no. She said he had his chance. Now here's where the questions get sharper. Did Luke know the wedding wasn't happening before that moment? His reaction after she left was eerily composed. In the leaked B-roll, while production scrambled, Luke leaned against the wall, scrolled through his phone, and when someone asked if they should still prep his tux, he half laughed. That physical response tells you a lot more than his TLC confessionals ever did. It's one thing to handle embarrassment privately. It's another to watch the person you were about to marry walk away, flanked by a mic pack, crying in full daylight, and barely blink. That's not heartbreak. That's detachment. And whether you see that as strength or stonewalling depends on how you've read his body language all season. So, was Meline blindsided by betrayal? Or was this her way of resetting the story before the edit turned her into the villain? And even bigger, was the relationship real, or was someone benefiting from the illusion all along? Meline had been vocal about wanting to stay in the US. Luke had been vague whenever people asked if he wanted to stay with her after filming. It's worth asking if either of them ever wanted the outcome they said they did. Because when the cameras went off and Meline left that parking lot alone, everything changed. Not just for their story, but for what fans now question about all these public relationships we think we know. And what spilled out in the hours after her exit puts everything they built into question. Some splits don't start with shouting, they start with silence. Long before Meline canceled the wedding, the signs were already screaming at anyone who paid attention, but TLC's camera angles carefully dodged the truth, like they knew too much honesty would crack the whole season wide open. Behind the polished montages and soft focus ring shots, something ugly was already hiding in plain sight, and the people who saw it weren't producers. It was the viewers. The first red flag? Meline's sister disappeared from the storyline completely. 1 minute she's FaceTiming during early planning, hyping up the big day, and the next, gone like she never existed. No calls, no appearance, no mention. Viewers who caught the post-episode livestream remember Meline saying, "Not everyone approved," with that thin, tired smile people give when they don't want to cry on camera. That's not wedding prep energy, that's damage control with foundation on it. And Luke? He barely pretended to care about the wedding outside of reciting deadlines. For someone allegedly in love, his excitement lived entirely in checklists. No butterflies, no nerves, just, "Did you call the florist?" Like he was planning for a company picnic, not promising to spend his life with someone. Fans even pointed out how flat his tone was every time he said the words, "our future." Like the future was a chore he agreed to handle, not a dream he was fighting for. Meline's posted photos told a whole different story, and that's where the cracks get louder. Her captions started turning vague weeks before the cancellation. No more Luke and I. Suddenly it was this journey, personal growth, standing alone when you need to. And the ring? Missing in over 7 grid posts before anyone noticed. People always notice. It didn't help that her expressions in photos looked more strained. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. One user even pointed out a visible puffiness underneath both eyes during the clambake episode, guessing it was from crying. Maybe it was. Maybe she was exhausted. But it was not the glow of a bride-to-be basking in her moment. The on-camera stuff was just as glaring if you watch it right. Let's start at the infamous cake tasting. Everyone saw them sitting side by side, barely talking. Meline tried to get Luke's attention showing funny designs, and Luke. He nodded, didn't look up, and scrolled on his phone under the table. That wasn't boredom. That was detachment. It's subtle, but it stings, because when someone stops doing the little things, like reacting to your joy, that's when you know they're already checked out. But the audio gave everything away in the background. Fans who re-watched noticed the producers left in a faint sigh during Meline's, "What do you think of this one?" You can hear her tone shift between polite curiosity and forced patience. He just shrugged, barely said a word. That's not a couple picking a cake. That's 2 people stuck in a contract. Even the family dynamic told its own story. Luke's mom didn't come to the dress shopping day, and neither did Meline's maid of honor. TLC edited it lightly, like it was quiet. But behind-the-scenes whispers suggest major off-camera disagreements between Meline's cousin and Luke's mom happened less than 48 hours before. Not speculation. This was confirmed by 2 cast members later who indirectly referenced a shouting match over boundaries. And the more footage shows Luke avoiding touch. avoiding eye contact, avoiding emotional depth. The more fans started to wonder if this wasn't someone falling out of love, but someone who never really let himself fall in at all. You can't fake warmth. And you definitely can't fake enthusiasm on reality TV for more than 3 episodes before the mask slips. Luke's mask barely made it past episode 4. When Meline asked him during the registry scene if he liked the silverware set for our future dinners, his face literally froze. Go look again, like his entire nervous system paused, just deciding how to lie politely. In the end, he didn't even answer. He mumbled something, looked at the producer, and changed the subject. Fans clipped that scene 1,000 times because it felt so surreal, like a robot pretending to be in love. Even the sound tech left a tiny ambient moment where nobody talked for 3 whole seconds. It was awkward silence on lit screen. But it wasn't all Luke. Meline had her moments too, especially her control. There were times she didn't want a partner. She wanted a performer hitting his marks. Everyone remembers the "your suit needs to match my cousin's tie" and "don't roll your eyes" scene. Luke was wrong in how he shut it down, but the pressure in Meline's tone didn't sound like love either. It sounded like panic. Like she needed this to go perfectly because something deeper was falling apart. There was no true intimacy, no softness. You can be loud and still be emotionally distant. They proved that. Every kiss looked rehearsed. Every laugh looked clipped. And maybe the weirdest part? They hardly ever used "I love you" unprompted. Most couples on 90 Day Fiancé go overboard. These two barely whispered it unless someone asked. That's not minimalism, that's misalignment. But here's where the entire timeline starts falling apart, and the truth leaks through. TLC edited the episodes as if everything was building toward a wedding, but longer-time fans noticed a shuffled order in filming. Meline's final confessional clip shows her in a completely different outfit than anything in the week leading up to the ceremony. Why? Because they filmed that scene after she had already left. That means producers knew she was gone, then asked her to come back in and give a breakdown as if things were still moving forward. Watch her delivery again. It sounds bitter, tired, too calm. That's not a bride still figuring things out. That's someone post-breakdown, honoring a contract. And that changes everything, because if they filmed the final reactions after the wedding was already off, how much of what we were shown was real? Did they agree to fake optimism just to protect the narrative? Did Luke even care about damage control, or was he just playing out the clock? At some point, she must have asked him, honestly, if he wanted to keep going, if he believed in them, if he was still in it. And when she started asking questions and didn't like the answers, that's when things turned. It didn't happen at the altar. It didn't happen at the rehearsal dinner. The fight that ended Meline and Luke wasn't planned, filmed, or staged. It happened in a narrow hallway, hours before call time, with no makeup, no production light rigs, and no second takes. What we know starts with noise. One of the neighbors in the filming complex posted an Instagram story, later deleted, saying there was a screaming match coming from the apartment across the hallway around 6 in the morning. The timestamp matched perfectly with the production day scheduled for the wedding. Cameras were supposed to start rolling by 8 a.m. By then, the crew showed up to nothing but a locked door, a quiet morning, and missing leads. The footage we do have gives us the breadcrumbs. Episode 9 showed them prepping the seating chart. That scene looked normal on the surface. Banter, miscommunication, small quirks. But freeze the frame when Meline finds out Luke moved her uncle to a back table. Her smile fades. She sits slowly, and the camera lingers. It's only a few seconds, but that's when the buildup began. The real damage wasn't one big fight. It was accumulation, day after day of tension, repressed emotion, and nasty little micro-rejections that added up to full-on resentment buried just beneath the surface. One huge theme? Control. Not in the textbook way, but in decision-making. Luke didn't fight. He edited. When he didn't want something, he didn't push back. He just silently changed it later and left it for Meline to discover. An address switch on the invites. The seating names swapped, her friend list shortened for capacity, always under the excuse of, "I didn't think it mattered." But it did. Control doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just quietly removes your name from things you spent days building. And Meline? She fired back, always indirectly. Notice how every conflict started the same way, with her narrating his behavior to him. You always pull away when I'm excited. You pretend to listen, but your face freezes. She didn't ask. She declared. She wasn't wrong, but she made every expression sound like accusation. Luke, in turn, shut down even more. It wasn't talk. These were emotional withdrawal tactics dressed up as daily interactions. And control on her side? It came out in critique. The way his tie didn't sit right, how slowly he answered, the photos he picked, her tone saying, "You're not embarrassing, you're just not enough." So when they reached the final night before the wedding, they were two people pressed up against each other, not in love, but in obligation. The trigger, by most accounts, was the guest list. Meline had asked Luke why a name was removed. He reportedly said the person wasn't relevant anymore. And the person? Her college best friend who had flown out and paid to be part of the bridal photos. That wasn't a small cut, that was a blade straight to the story she had built. Witnesses in the building said the yelling started in the hallway and ended inside the apartment. Someone from the crew posted images from the street, blurred of course, showing producers pacing near a house entrance on phones. That's how quickly everything spiraled. But let's go deeper than the logistics. The root of the fight wasn't over table placement, it was about value. Meline didn't feel seen, and Luke didn't want to be responsible for anyone else's emotional needs. It was the worst possible pairing. Not because they hated each other, but because they didn't know how to need each other. It's betrayal, yes, but not traditional betrayal. It was emotional neglect versus emotional demand. A quiet rivalry between self-preservation and full-blown vulnerability. That night was reportedly brutal. One source who overheard them said Meline shouted, "I'm done performing for you. I'm done acting like you love me." That line stuck, because buried in it is the pain of someone who's been waiting for affection that never grows roots, who's tried everything, who's still being met halfway with empty hands. Luke never yelled back, not even once, and that made it worse. Because in emotionally tense dynamics, nothing wounds deeper than being ignored while you're hurting. That's not peacekeeping, it's salt on already bleeding skin. Rather than defend, he withdrew. They were mid-wedding prep and the bride was sobbing in the other room while the groom allegedly scrolled. That's not rejection, that's humiliation. But it's important to ask, was this grief or was this exposure? Because Meline wasn't blindsided. She saw this version of Luke throughout the season. She broke down in episode 5 not because she was surprised, but because her voice didn't move him then either. And Luke? He knew her temper. He called her reaction unfair more than once, but he stayed until it collapsed. They weren't a match. They were mirrors, reflecting back the worst kind of emotional loneliness, the one where you're physically close but constantly misunderstood. That's the sort that doesn't explode in one moment. It dies in the empty gaps between forced conversation. There was one moment during the fight where fans believe he muttered something under his breath. The audio is raw. It isn't subtitled. You need headphones. Right after she tosses her phone onto the table and demands, "Do you even want this?" you hear him barely whisper, "Not like this." Quiet, almost resigned, but absolutely real. And what Luke said under his breath in that final scene? Fans caught it, and TLC never subtitled it. Those 3 words didn't clarify his love. They exposed his guilt. Or at least his disconnect. He wasn't cruel, he just lacked presence. To be emotionally unavailable isn't always abuse, but it is still a wound, and when she left it was already done. The fight didn't destroy them, the silence after did. Some relationships don't break, they reveal. Looking back on Meline and Luke's entire 90-day journey, you start to realize this wasn't just another failed matchup. It was never an equal one to begin with. From the way choices were made to how emotions were handled, their partnership always felt unbalanced. And no matter how photogenic they looked standing next to each other, love built on uneven ground doesn't grow. It sinks. Let's start with power. Not the loud, obvious kind, the kind that controls the terms and sets the emotional tone. Luke was already in the US, stable, with community, income, and his family around the corner. Meline arrived with hope and anxiety bundled into one suitcase and a single promise. He's the person I'm building a life with. That's more than love, that's dependence. Luke had options. Meline had a countdown clock. And when one person holds the keys to a visa, a future, and an emotional connection, that's not partnership. That's control, even if unintentional. Every disagreement they had played out under that invisible pressure. Meline wanted clarity. Luke wanted time. She needed words. He offered gestures. She was asking for a plan. He gave her more questions. That sense of not knowing, of constantly begging for connection, eats away at someone's core. Then we hit the cultural imbalance. Meline came from a family culture where emotions aren't just expected, they're essential. Presence, openness, involvement, these are pillars. Luke? He grew up in a setting where emotional control and politeness mattered more than emotional honesty. You saw it in how he deflected confrontation, how he tightened up the second conflict showed up. Their way of processing reality was mismatched at the root. Take that dress-fitting scene. Meline's emotional meltdown wasn't just about the dress. It was her standing in front of mirrors, alone, without her groom showing any excitement. Her culture made this a milestone. His reactions made it look like a chore. Her relatives cheered, his barely replied to the text. That's not indifference, it's a disconnect in what love looks like. But when you ignore those differences long enough, resentment grows in the gap where support should have been. Age also played a role. Luke may be older chronologically, but Meline came in with years of relationship toughness. Life hadn't been easy, and she quickly developed emotional survival skills. All that did was run straight into Luke's emotional walls. She was expressive, fixed on clarity, desperate for intimacy. He treated emotional questions like exams he hoped to fail silently. The result? Her looking needy, and him looking cold. But strip away the edits and fan bias, and neither of them looked villainous, just unequally equipped. They weren't speaking the same language. Meline moved with urgency, with purpose. For her, a missed answer felt like betrayal. For Luke, being pushed emotionally felt like suffocation. And that mismatch created a constant cycle. Her escalating, him retreating, both quietly judging each other for coping the only way they knew how. Financial imbalance added a hidden layer. Meline didn't shout about money, but the hints were always there. During the apartment tour, she was hyper-focused on value. The wedding venue? She negotiated every detail while Luke said, "Whatever you want." That response sounds loving but can be strategic. Letting your partner carry all the planning puts them in a box you can later say you never agreed to. It gives you an escape route if things go bad. "I just went along with it" is not passive. It's manipulative when done in silence. And fans had opinions, loud ones. Some argued that Meline pushed too hard, that she wanted assurance too fast. Others saw Luke's dodging as emotional red flags from day one. A poll on a popular TLC community thread showed it almost split. 54% blamed Luke for emotional detachment. 36% said Meline rushed something that was never real. But both sides agreed on one thing. It felt fake near the end. Something wasn't sitting right. People went as far as comparing them to early seasons, saying the only thing more uncomfortable was watching couples pretend for camera checks. You don't have to name celebrities to recognize the trend. Fast-moving relationships based on optics. Captions that say, "Love," but eyes that say, "I'm trying." Side profiles that erase every single hint of tension. And then suddenly, breakup notes without any warning. We've seen too many versions of this fake fairy tale, and Meline and Luke followed it with surgical precision. But here's where empathy matters. Meline may have pushed, but she did it from fear, not cruelty. The fear of being left mid-process. The fear of starting over while already halfway across the world. The fear of being another woman edited into a one-sided sob story. And Luke may have stayed quiet because talking felt like failure. Some people aren't built to be emotionally fluent under pressure. That isn't innocence, but it is pain. You could sense it in the small pivots. Every time Luke laughed awkwardly instead of answering a direct question. Every time Meline posted a solo selfie with a quote begging for comfort. This wasn't healthy growth. This was emotional limbo with a filter on. The moment that hits hardest is what happened 2 weeks before the wedding, on that now-deleted live stream where they were asked how they met. Meline started to explain. Luke interrupted. His timeline didn't match. They shared a weird glance. Silence. Then a pause. Then Meline shifted, changed the subject, and shut off comments. That mismatch? That's where the story frays. But one slip-up on their livestream hinted this relationship may not have started with love at all. Something didn't align. And when beginnings are foggy, endings tend to fall apart without warning. Because even though Meline said she needed honesty, he gave her silence and a broken visa plan. When people say Meline ran away from her wedding, they frame it like she bolted in the middle of a tantrum, but that version erases everything that happened the week before. It erases the bruises you can't see on a heart that's been stretched too far, too long. It erases the fact that sometimes walking out doesn't mean giving up. It means you've already been left, quietly, repeatedly, and without apology. 7 days before the wedding, Meline wasn't glowing. She was spiraling. Every vendor meeting felt rushed. Every smile looked frozen halfway through. And in the dressing room filming session with her stylist, you could see it in her reflection. She didn't want to look at herself in the mirror. She kept adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. That's not nerves. That's someone trying to control the only thing they still can, their appearance, when everything else feels like it's slipping. And behind that mirror, things were moving fast. She was still texting with her cousin back home, the same cousin who was supposed to fly in and be part of the bridal party. But 3 days before boarding, Meline told her not to come. Just said, "There's been a change." The cousin posted a vague story that night. Sometimes silence says more than the vows ever could. That didn't come from nowhere. Inside sources say Meline had at least 2 phone calls with her mom that week. One of them over an hour, the other cut short when Meline started crying and hung up. Her family had always been skeptical of Luke. Not because of where he lived or how he looked, but because of how detached he acted in moments that demanded intimacy. The times when Meline would share something vulnerable, and he'd offer a nod instead of comfort. That's the moment her mom said it stopped feeling like love and started feeling like logistics. People close to Meline said she started attending therapy, not for Luke, for herself. Online sessions paid for by a cousin. She told someone on set that she felt like she was constantly performing, and no matter how many emotions she voiced, she never got anything real back in return. Being unseen while standing right next to someone? That breaks you slowly, quietly, then all at once. Which makes the next part hard to say out loud. Was leaving revenge? Or was it resistance? The truth probably lives in between. There were moments Meline wanted someone else to pull the plug. She kept giving Luke chances to be the one who says, "This isn't working, let's face it together." But he never did. He just coasted. Soft responses, vague affirmations, smiles that looked borrowed. And somewhere on that timeline, Meline realized she was the only one feeling deeply in a space built for 2. Viewers noticed how her voice changed during the last few confessionals, less upbeat, more controlled, deliberate, like every sentence was carrying a history behind it. That shift wasn't random. That's what people sound like when they've stopped waiting for someone to fight for them. That's when they choose themselves. But there was still pressure. From producers, from contracts, from the hope that maybe something would magically reset and feel better. Pressure can be deceptive. It looks like love when it says, "Just wait one more day." It looks like effort when it whispers, "Try not to embarrass him." Meline listened to that voice longer than most people would admit, and that's why her final decision wasn't impulsive. It was a slow goodbye that only felt sudden because she didn't narrate it out loud. And then came the text. No one expected it. Production was already setting up the lights. Hair team was halfway through prep. Luke was off camera doing phone interviews, and Meline, quiet, alone in a room with tissue paper from the dress delivery laid out in front of her, got the message. Allegedly, it was a screenshotted thread, a summary of messages between Luke and the woman fans had speculated about for weeks, not confirmed cheating, but absolute confirmation of emotional intimacy outside the relationship. A message sent days before that said, "Don't worry, everything's still set, I'll handle it after." The "it" wasn't named, but it didn't need to be, and everything changed when one text came through, and no one, not even production, was prepared. She didn't cry immediately. She didn't scream. She asked for a ride. Alone. She disconnected her mic. She laid the dress down, not tossed, folded, and then she left. Her choice wasn't casino-level theatrics. It was quiet, cold, controlled. A woman stepping onto the street and choosing the unknown over continuing a story she knew would destroy her. That's not drama. That's dignity. But here's the part that stunned everyone. She waited. She didn't tell them right away. Makeup was already at the apartment. The timeline was ticking. People were dressed. Luke was waiting. And still, Meline said nothing. That call to producers came 4 minutes before the crew's scheduled arrival. She just said, "It's not happening. I'm done." But why didn't she tell the crew until 4 minutes before call time? To understand Luke, you have to stop listening to what he says and start paying attention to what he does. From the beginning, Luke positioned himself as reliable, calm, and emotionally grounded, the chill one. He told the audience, the producers, Meline, even himself, that he was ready for commitment. "I'm here to build something real." That's what he said. But the problem is, his actions kept drifting further and further from that statement, and by the time it all fell apart, charm was the only thing left. Take his confessionals, soft-spoken, measured, cautious. He explained Meline's emotional intensity with a quiet smile, like he wanted the audience to think he was the steady hand holding the relationship together. And at first, it worked. Viewers liked him. Social media lit up with comments calling him mature, patient, even the only sane one. Compared to Meline's visible frustration, Luke's restraint looked like virtue. But it wasn't restraint. It was evasion. Go back. Watch the footage again. And this time, don't focus on his voice. Watch his eyes. Every time Meline asked an important question about the future, their plans, her place in his life, he blinked harder, looked down, gave half answers. That fake calm was just a smokescreen. Over and over, he avoided the heat of the conversation and made her carry the emotional weight alone. There's this one scene during the wedding seating plan discussion where she asks, "Do you think your mom is okay with me sitting next to her?" He gives this weird, hollow laugh and says, "She'll survive." That's not a joke. That's someone refusing to confirm security. That answer doesn't soothe, it dismisses. And when you love someone, you don't let them cook up worst-case scenarios alone. The real cracks started showing in how he handled space. Luke knew words could get him cornered, so he relied heavily on timing gaps. Pauses so long, Meline often filled them with her own anxieties. That's not emotional intelligence. That's a dance people learn when they want to look engaged without taking accountability. Letting others do the emotional lifting speaks louder than anything verbal ever could. There's a moment during the dough rolling scene, something as simple as wedding menu prep, where Meline reaches for his hand covered in flour, smiling, hoping for playfulness. He doesn't meet her halfway. Instead, he says, "You're getting it everywhere," and pulls away. You could almost hear her energy fold back into herself. He wasn't rejecting her affection, but he didn't return it either. That's the pattern. Luke didn't push her away harshly, but he never pulled her closer either. Indifference in a relationship doesn't always show up shouting. It just slowly erases intimacy until one person's doing all the reaching. And maybe Luke thought that made him the better person, drama-free, controlled, clinical. But relationships don't thrive in silence, they need participation. They need sweat and fear and openness and showing up even when it's uncomfortable. Luke showed up with checklists and awkward jokes. He called her his person, but protected his own bubble like she was a visitor standing just outside it. So was he lying? Not necessarily. Luke didn't scream deception. His words made sense. His body language didn't. Watch him during the dress fitting, that moment fans can't stop talking about. Meline steps out slowly, clearly emotional, asking shyly, "Do you think it's too much?" A moment for reassurance, connection, admiration. He looks at her for a second too long and then nods. Just a nod. Then looks down. Awkward, detached, not cruel, just absent. But when he looked at her during the dress fitting, did you notice his face? It wasn't joy or affection, it was hesitation, and that small, subtle hesitation told us more than all the ring talk combined, because when you're in love, you light up seeing your partner ready to celebrate a future with you. His lights never flickered once. Now, some people say that Luke was emotionally avoidant, others believe he was emotionally exhausted, and honestly, both might be true. Avoidant people fear conflict, flee intimacy, and mask fear with indifference. Exhausted people shut down when they feel trapped by emotional expectations they can't meet. Luke gave signals of both, and you don't have to hate someone to feel paralyzed by their needs. But here's the thing. If it's emotional exhaustion, where was the vulnerability? Where was the effort to say, "I'm trying but struggling"? Where were his hard conversations? Because Meline had them, often, loudly, publicly. Whatever her flaws, she didn't hide. Luke stayed quiet all the way to the edge. Even in the final episode after she left, his composure shocked everyone. He wasn't heartbroken, he was polite, mildly stunned. Like a guy who got stuck in traffic, not one who just lost his fiancé. That's the moment fans started revising their view. Was he always this emotionally disconnected? Did TLC edit him softer at first? Did we confuse stillness with stability? When you strip away his tone and take only the pattern of his choices, Luke's image doesn't hold up. He delayed important conversations. He shut down when uncomfortable. He maintained distance in the name of peace and mistook withdrawal for maturity. You can be calm and still be emotionally absent. You can say all the right things and still offer no safety. And you can claim you're ready for marriage and still act like you're planning your exit. He said he wanted a wife, but all his actions screamed solo. For weeks, speculation swirled, not just about the breakup, not just about the wedding, but about the bigger question neither Meline nor Luke ever addressed directly. Was this about love or the visa? From the outside, it always seemed like love at first swipe. A fast connection, chemistry, video calls that lasted till morning. But the closer you looked, the more the timeline raised eyebrows. They barely knew each other before the K-1 application started, and while Luke claimed time zones made it hard to visit more often, he still waited to meet her family until cameras were involved. Love flourishes in messy human moments, not just long-distance filters and storybook edits, and too often, Meline and Luke looked like people rehearsing romance, not living it. The green card whispers started small. Reddit threads, fragments of TikToks, a few fan theories. But by the time the cancellation hit, those whispers turned into conversations. Was this always about securing a life in the U.S., or was it a relationship with real feelings that got crushed under the weight of expectations, culture shock, and emotional mismatch? Let's pull the lens back. Coming to the U.S. on a K-1 visa doesn't automatically mean manipulation. It means paperwork, pressures, tight deadlines, and a 90-day clock that turns every disagreement into a potential disaster. You're expected to merge cultures, finances, living spaces, and long-term commitments in less time than it takes most couples to agree on furniture. Meline was under that pressure. But so was Luke. And while it's easy to paint one person as the user, the truth isn't that neat. She came hoping for stability, for safety, for someone who said he wanted a future. He offered it, or something that looked like it. She believed him, or needed to. The question is, when did both of them start realizing that what they were building wasn't a marriage? It was a project. Emotionally, Meline was in. Her expressions, her body language, her tearful confessionals, none of that looked fake. If there was strategy involved in this relationship, it likely wasn't about creating a clean exit plan. It was about buying time, surviving hope, waiting for him to finally meet her with the same readiness she showed from day one. But here's where intent and outcome don't always match. Because on paper, Meline's trajectory was classic. A strong, glowing woman enters a foreign country with the man she believes in, starts the wedding process, and then, boom, the story collapses. And since she's the one left scrambling with no spouse, no home of her own, and no guaranteed adjustment of immigration status, people assumed ulterior motives. She got what she wanted. She played the long game. She'll stay anyway. But those takes miss something vital. She didn't get what she wanted. She lost everything at once. If the plan was purely transactional, she would have played a longer game. She would have stayed quiet. She would have married him, secured the conditional green card, and peeled away later like others allegedly have. But walking out before the vows? That cost her everything, legally, financially, emotionally. That's not strategy, that's surrender. Legally speaking, walking away cancels the process. The K-1 only converts into permanent residency if the marriage takes place. No wedding, no green card, no automatic reapplication, no fallback unless immigration lawyers find a rare exception under hardship or fraud, both nearly impossible without evidence. So unless Meline had a secret ace, which no signs support, her exit was a reset button. Not leverage. That's a step few would take unless the situation felt unbearable. So the question shifts, why leave without the safety net? Because she understood something people watching forgot. Your peace is worth more than your plan. You can build a future on shaky ground, but every step forward hurts more. Staying means shrinking, and Meline refused to shrink. Still, there's another layer. Something neither side fully admitted. Luke enjoyed the dynamic too. Whether he realized it or not, he liked being needed, appearing calm, holding the emotional power in conversations, and to some degree, he liked that she needed him to stay. That imbalance made him feel essential, even when he wasn't fully invested. But what they both forgot? Fans were watching and taking notes. Across forums, receipts piled up, clips of Luke ignoring her, screenshots of Meline creating her own bridal mood boards weeks before he RSVP'd to anything, posts from her friends that didn't tag him, clips from their awkward live streams where she did all the talking. The fandom didn't just witness their drift, they documented it. Still, empathy has a place here. Because even if Meline hoped this would lead to a secure life in a new country, that hope didn't cancel the real love she felt, or the heartbreak she couldn't hide. Survival and sincerity aren't opposites. Some people really do want both. And the timeline, compressed, chaotic, public, forced decisions faster than their bond could truly stabilize. They weren't frauds. They were two people moving under pressure in different emotional directions. Luke looked overwhelmed most of the time, whether it was wedding talk, visa logistics, or emotional commitment. Every encounter with responsibility seemed to drain him. And maybe he wasn't built for a cross-continental relationship with high stakes and constant emotional demands. That's not fraud. That's unpreparedness. And Meline? She loved him, maybe too quickly, maybe enough to ignore red flags, but you don't write vows, tears streaming, for someone you're using. You don't risk your legal status to walk away from comfort. At the core, this wasn't about deception. It was about two people who entered a high-speed relationship with low emotional compatibility and no exit plan beyond pretending everything was fine until it wasn't. And it gets heavy when you realize that maybe neither of them lied. They were just hoping something would click. She said, "I didn't come to America for this." But did she come for something else entirely? With everything that's surfaced, the story between Meline and Luke pushes us into harder territory. where the lines blur, where intention clashes with outcome, and where love stories don't end in betrayal but in fatigue. People want clean answers. They want to know who was wrong, but sometimes what goes wrong isn't loud or obvious. It's quiet. It's in who listens, who doesn't, who shows up when there's no camera rolling, and who disappears while standing right next to you. If we're being honest, a lot of viewers saw some part of themselves in Meline, that part that overthinks the silence, that hopes clarity will come tomorrow, that convinces itself one more conversation might finally unlock the safety it's been chasing. And people saw themselves in Luke, too, the quiet ones, the ones who freeze when emotion hits too hard, who don't have the tools to argue, so they shut down and let everything float away. But now we're deep in the aftermath, and bigger questions show up. Was any of this emotional abuse, or just mutual immaturity that never found its middle? Luke didn't scream. He didn't call names, but he weaponized indifference in ways that harmed. That's the hard truth. When someone you're building a life with refuses to meet you in your emotion, day after day, it shreds your sense of self just the same. It's not textbook abuse, but it hollows you out. It makes you question your worth. And Meline didn't always handle that distance with grace. She lashed out. She cried in public. Her frustration boiled over in ugly ways more than once. There were moments her delivery made it hard for Luke to engage, and moments where she made him the villain without fully hearing his limits. Immaturity doesn't excuse pain, but pain explains why people keep clashing with the same walls until they bleed. Still, when fans rewatched the final lead-up, many realized the fight wasn't about bouquets or bridal seating charts. It was about dignity, that unspoken feeling of being tolerated instead of treasured. Of sensing, deep inside, that the person you've chosen either can't or won't fully choose you back. That kind of sorrow buries itself in daily moments. A non-answer, a sigh after an "I love you," a shrug when someone shares something personal. And the cost of staying gets high, not just logistically, emotionally. Trying to keep a relationship alive when it's already dying eats away at you. You start performing instead of engaging. You stop asking for what you need. You convince yourself needing less is how to make it work. And that's where so many fans related. This wasn't just Meline's story. It was the story of anyone who loved harder than the other person could handle. When she said, "I didn't come to America for this," it wasn't blame. It was heartbreak. She uprooted everything, left her support, her routines, her language, her safety. Not because she needed a visa, but because she needed someone to match the weight of her leap. And Luke, he didn't, and maybe couldn't. And the simplest action in episode 9 might be the final proof this relationship was over long before the big day. It's in the contrast. In the living room, just before the reception plan was finalized, Meline turned to Luke with a small moment of peace, offering a gentle, hopeful smile. She was trying again, hoping again. And in return, he didn't smile back. He looked at his checklist. He asked when food delivery was coming. That disconnect didn't scream betrayal, but it screamed defeat. The tragedy isn't in what either of them did, it's in what they couldn't do. They couldn't bridge the gap between emotion and expression, couldn't figure out how to comfort instead of provoke. Couldn't soften when the other was already breaking, and yet, they both stayed longer than they should have. That's the final weight. They both believed persistence could replace connection, but love doesn't work that way. No amount of trying harder can fix someone who isn't there in the first place, and no level of composure can stop someone from bleeding inside when they're being slowly unseen. External pressure made it messier. Family expectations, legal stakes, public visibility, producers urging milestones. None of that made it easier to walk away. And maybe that's why it ended the way it did. Because when someone stays too long, the exit always feels more explosive than the real story behind it. Meline wasn't running away from love. She was walking away from a version of herself that had settled. Luke didn't throw her out. He just kept making the space colder day by day, until even staying started to feel like its own kind of exile. And that's what fans should sit with, not blame, but the recognition that relationships fail quietly, drip by drip. And when those small things go unmet, the entire future begins to unravel, not from betrayal, but from absence. Sometimes love doesn't end. It unravels, piece by silent piece. Breakups rarely start with shouting or grand exits. They don't usually crack in a single moment. They crumble slowly, almost politely, and by the time you finally see the pieces fall, it's already too late. The damage is done, not by betrayal, but by neglect. Not through chaos, but through quiet, steady erosion of closeness. That's what happened with Meline and Luke. From the outside, it may have looked like an instant collapse, a bride walking out, a wedding canceled, an explosive finale for the cameras, but from the inside, it was death by emotional distance, a million small gaps left unspoken, a slow disintegration of hope, of trust, of the kind of bond that doesn't need lines. It moves instinctively. Real connection fades not when people fight, but when one of them stops fighting at all. The biggest lesson from this story isn't about Meline or Luke. It's about the danger of rewriting red flags into puzzles we're tempted to solve. Too many people, in and outside of this show, get stuck believing love means fixing. That deep down, there's a better version of your partner hiding under the silence, and if you're gentle enough, patient enough, passionate enough, you'll bring them out. But behaviors don't lie. And red flags don't get clearer the longer you stare at them. They get brighter. Red flags mean stop. They don't mean argue. They don't mean analyze. They don't mean beg. They're calls to protect yourself, not invitations to heal someone else. Luke's silence wasn't mystery. It was insulation. Meline's panic wasn't drama. It was a desperate signal her needs weren't being met. And both of them fell for the illusion that if they're calm, if they're loyal, if they smile in the right places at the right time, the emotional debt will pay itself off. But real connection is never style over substance. On this show especially, people get boxed into characters. The calm one, the crazy one, the dreamer, the villain. But the real story lives outside the role. Luke wanted to be seen as stable, a guy who didn't raise his voice, who stayed neutral. But his neutrality came at the cost of his presence. You don't get credit for being calm if your calm feels like absence. And Meline struggled with being labeled emotional, intense, too much. But her intensity came from caring. She felt too deeply. She tried too hard. She cracked open every time because silence makes overthinkers fill in gaps with heartbreak. Neither of them were villains, but neither were ready to be partners. Not with each other, and not for the pressure they brought into this dynamic. Because pretending to be okay for the camera doesn't change what's breaking under the surface. And letting someone carry all the emotional weight in a relationship makes it easier to be the reasonable one, but only because you're not the one bleeding. For everyone watching, this season became more than a storyline. It was about learning the hard way what happens when we stay too long, when we confuse being understood with being heard, when we wait for someone to become the person they were never capable of being to begin with. If you saw yourself in this story, you're not alone. There's no shame in trying, but the cost of constantly loving through confusion is too high, whether it's for a visa or validation or a version of who you hoped they'd become. Staying for the wrong reasons will always take more from you than leaving ever could. Your clarity isn't going to come from what people claim to feel. It comes from how they act. Love without effort is decoration, promises without presence are fiction, and emotional unavailability wrapped in charm is still distance, no matter how nice it sounds. So whatever you thought of Meline or Luke, who was more responsible, who should have walked sooner, just know this. It didn't fall apart because of one argument. It wasn't about timelines or logistics. It fell because both of them were building something neither of them had the tools to complete. And if watching their wedding collapse felt too familiar, then maybe this season wasn't entertainment. Maybe it was a mirror. Because this next chapter has even TLC producers saying, "Wait, what?" And if you thought Meline and Luke were messy, wait until you hear what's happening with the next couple. They've got the same timeline, the same pressure, but with one major twist that's already blowing up behind the scenes. Don't blink. This next story doesn't just push boundaries, it breaks them.